is actually not, like, a lot of people get it wrong. They're like, oh, employee ownership, Reins, like it must be this like socialistic machine. It's like, no, actually, I'm like a diehard meritocracy guy. And a lot of our customers are those who want to give it to everyone can, and those who want to.
We all exit our company eventually. The question is, will it be on your terms or someone else's? Strategy matters. Timing matters. The right partner changes everything. Brought to you by Meritage Partners. Here is your host, Brian Franco, author of The Inevitable Exit. This is the M&A Guy Podcast.
Welcome back to the M&A Guy Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about ownership without selling, the future of employee retention, and succession planning. One of the biggest misconceptions entrepreneurs have is believing they own a valuable company simply because they own 100% of the equity. But here's what buyers know in the marketplace. 100% of a business that can't operate without its founder may actually be worth less than a business where ownership, leadership, and incentives are aligned. Today, we're talking about one of the most important conversations founders can have long before an exit: ownership. I'm Brian Franco, founder and CEO of Meritage Partners, and this is the M&A Guy Podcast, where we help founders build transferable businesses, increase enterprise value, and exit intentionally. And today, I am joined by a guest who's changing the way founders think about employee ownership and succession. Chris is a co-founder and CEO of Reins, a fintech company helping independent businesses and owners retain key employees and prepare for ownership transition through innovative alternatives to traditional equity. Man, that was a lot, Chris. Thanks for being on with us. How are you?
Yeah, my pleasure, Brian. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So Chris, I mean, what you have built and brought to market is it's not common for when you look at other technology companies and other fintech companies that are out there. What was really the driving force or the aha moment when you're like, okay, we got to bring this to market?
Yeah, it's been a windy road, but I suppose that's how you know it's sort of paved with good intentions. So my story is that I grew up working for my old man. He was a small independent business owner, and I worked for him for about 5 years after college. Built a lot of empathy for the average business owner. I later left. I started a software company, completely unrelated, kind of went on my own, learned a lot, ended up successfully selling that business in 2021. And I learned a bunch through that process. One, it's really tough selling a business, which is something you know all too well. And so, just thinking about entrepreneurs through that journey. And then I also learned how meaningful equity was when a team is truly aligned, and how meaningful that can become when you eventually do have an exit. And looking into my past with my experience with my dad, I realized that the average independent business doesn't have the same access to the tools that big corporations, private equity, and in my case, it was venture capital. So yeah, it was a startup, but we had all the knowledge and tools of the VC world.
Correct.
And equity is very commonplace. But for the millions of small independent businesses across this country, they don't have access to those tools. And so when I started talking to business owners, sort of wading through the waters of what I wanted to do next, it became very clear that while, as you know, a lot of them have to exit, what's really palpable in front of them is my employees, retaining them, aligning them, etc. And the sort of lowest hanging fruit we could find was so many of them, like you kind of alluded to, had these, we call them late promises, like a back of the napkin. Hey, I'm going to give Billy 5% of the company one day when I sell. And we thought, well, interesting. I wonder if we could build a product around that. So it started from there.
That's amazing. Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, I wrote a book called Inevitable Exit. And in the book, I distilled down 7 value drivers of a company. And, founder dependency is one of those pillars. Or I should say, not having founder dependency is one of those pillars. And when you think about the cap table of a company, an investor, whether that be private equity, venture capital, a larger public company or a private entity, they're typically looking very closely at how dependent is the business or the people within the company on the founder or the CEO. And it's a problem we can solve for, but it usually comes with terms in the transaction. If you're sitting on the investor side of the table, this is a risk and reward equation, right? You're underwriting to risk. And honestly, what we see over and over again is one of those biggest risk factors is founder dependency. And
Mhm.
so when you think about that, when you think about the tool that you created, it absolutely helps spread the ownership, but not just ownership from the standpoint of the capital or the profitability or the distributions, but ownership of delivering your product or service to the market. And it forces you and causes you to think differently, right? Because you're accountable to the bottom line. You're accountable to the vision and the culture and everything involved in a company. So I have a question for you, because Chris, I often tell founders the biggest discount in M&A isn't a financial related discount or related to their financials. It's founder dependence
Mhm.
because the perception is that the transferability of that business comes under threat.
Yes.
So why do so many owners, in your experience, underestimate how much value is tied to them directly?
I honestly think, Brian, it's knowledge. I don't think they know.
Yeah.
What you're saying is like music to my ears because we think about it every day, and we
Yes.
we try and educate owners all the time. But if I'm being honest, other than just thinking about it from first principles, I don't know that I knew until I started this business how impactful, like how big the quantification of that problem is when you
Yeah.
actually underwrite it. So
Yes.
I think it's just a lack of understanding. I think once they know, then they can do something about it.
Yeah. I see a lot of content out there, of someone that has sold their company like you. And then they, self-proclaim themselves as exit expert, right? Because they sold one
Yeah,
company and that was their
yeah,
company. What I love about what you did is you hit head on one of the biggest risk factors, and that's the owner dependency factor we talked about. And you don't only approach it from a coaching standpoint or anything from that perspective. You built technology that helps address this, and it's powerful. I have a case study for you. We sold a client's business about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and he managed to own 100% of the company. It was a professional service company. We sold that business to a public group, a public entity. And he had five key employees. One of those five key employees was his son. And in this case study, what we found is that, although the owner was successful in maintaining 100% of ownership, but keeping his people sticky to the organization, which kudos to him for doing that.
mhm,
They loved him, they respected him, they trusted him. And in that environment, it's hard to replicate. But what we ended up doing is in the closing documents, we took and carved out 10% of management shares or 10% of shares that would be allocated towards management. And our client was then tasked with the responsibility of then deciding which percentage which went to which of those five individuals. And so it was pretty simple math, 10 divided by 5 was 2% each. He that's how he approached it. But what it did is it created true leadership and incentives. It enhanced the culture and it improved the delegation because when the company went under this public entity umbrella, it was, there's integration, there's a lot of noise. They navigated through that. But guess
yeah,
what? It wasn't our client as an standalone individual that had to do all that. He now had five reliable leaders that he was able to share that workload with and make sure that the continuity of the business survived within a public entity. And they've been growing and they've been thriving. And now you have these, what were non shareholders, not only shareholders of a company, but they're shareholders of a public company, which provides for liquidity. And that case study was important for me to share because your your technology would have helped tremendously leading up to that transactions.
yeah.
Because, as you know, buyers today aren't simply buying the business. They're buying the confidence that the business will perform after that founder
Yeah.
leaves. And founder dependence is the biggest valuation discount nobody talks about. And to your point, because they just don't know. So this episode's so powerful because it's a paradigm shift in what you and I are talking about. And those that are tuning in, and keep in mind, they're startups and scale ups, and those that are looking to exit from this, maybe they're looking to partner with a private equity group. And these are the questions that they're learning to ask. So again, kudos to you for building the technology.
Thank you.
And I want to roll into another question for you, but
Yeah,
because there's a lot to cover, so I'm going to try and pack it all in here for us.
let's do it.
Ownership without giving away the company is a complicated issue, right? Sometimes there's one partners. Sometimes even if there's one partners, there's husband and wife team. And one of the most fascinating things about your technology and your approach to alternative equity, can you dive in a little bit deeper into that and explain to founders or how founders can create ownership thinking inside their organization without immediately giving them the sensation that they're giving away ownership or they're giving away power? Tell us how you attack that.
Yeah. So, again, we came at this from first principles, and we've got some internal expertise, and we also have been able to partner with some folks that have spent decades in executive compensation and benefits, and we've integrated all of this incentive plan design even and integrated all of this expertise into our platform. So there's a couple different buckets, right? I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. What we specialize in is what we call alternative equity, which is an umbrella of incentives designed specifically for the average independent business owner. And so what is alternative equity? Well, it's anything from phantom stock, if you've heard of that,
Right.
profit sharing, performance bonuses, all what's formerly known as non-qualified deferred compensation. And so these are incentives, they're compensation that walk and talk like equity, but don't come with the traditional drawbacks of equity. And so from my experience, when you talk to a lot of owners, they are more than happy, in fact, far more generous than most people think in terms of sharing upside, but they are not interested necessarily in sharing control. And that control goes both ways. I think a lot of folks, when they don't truly understand this concept, they think that it's one-sided. But when you give real equity to an employee, traditional equity, I should say, you're also giving them some part of the liability.
Exactly.
And in a lot of cases, so the like sort of three plain English reasons why you would go with alternative equity over traditional equity. Well, one, when you grant any type of equity-based compensation, the IRS says that's income. So you have to pay tax on that income, even though there may not be cash to pay for that tax bill. So that's number one. With alternative equity, you actually get a tax deferral. Number two is the liability. Like we said, you're creating a partner, even if minority. And so they're going to take on that minority stake of the liabilities, the debts, the leases, the loans, etc. And you want to share the alignment in goals, but you don't want to share necessarily or have an obligation to share financial information, open the books necessarily. I mean, in my experience, the most successful entrepreneurs and owners are the ones that are more transparent than not.
Yes.
But to force an owner into a legal obligation to share the P&L or make a distribution when they don't have to is part of the reason for alternative equity. And so that's what we specialize in. Now, I will say, just for the fullness of trying to be helpful, there are other equity incentives that are effective if you're structured a different way. Like, I always like to say this because to me, it feels authentic. Like at Reins, we don't use alternative equity. We use traditional equity because that is more commensurate with venture capital. So we're a C Corp. We issue ISO stock options. That is traditional equity. It's far more complicated and very much unnecessary for the average independent business. But it's the way that it's the expectation of venture capital and the investors and how cap tables should be organized. And so, we can speak to that too, but that is for a different class of business in our experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredibly powerful because enterprise value, isn't just built through financial engineering. It's built by creating leadership that thinks like owners.
Right.
And this gives, key employees that opportunity. And, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but, At a high level, ESOPs are another example, right?
Yeah.
And ESOPs are complex. They're costly to maintain and manage. And they really create, I have experienced, and this is my opinion, over time, let's say over 8 to 10 year period of a company converting to an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program, they become these quasi public private agencies, and the culture shifts and it changes. And so what I like about what you've built at Reins is you could still preserve that culture. And I'll add one more thing here, and that is a lot of key employees in a variety of our clients' companies, they don't want ownership, right? Because
Exactly.
they don't see the benefit. They see a liability. They
Exactly.
see golden handcuffs that's going to keep them tied to this job. And when you look at the workforce, the younger generation, specifically, is they're more concerned with PTO, and they're more concerned with what is their benefits package. And no fault or harm in asking that and wanting that, but what has happened is the American dream is, from that perspective, is shifted, right? Because they see ownership is a liability. And so how do you address that in those that have those concerns?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I mean, not to get all philosophical, but as a society, I think we're going through a moment where I think there's a resurgence in the American dream in some ways, and then there is a decay of the American dream in some ways. I think
Yeah.
what you're saying is absolutely true. I think that has been the MO of the latest generation. But I also see in certain organizations where, kind of like oil separating from water, there are a handful of people that want to be a part of something bigger than themselves.
Yes.
And they have to, I think part of it is, like I always look at, like, my dad, for example, given that he's part of my story in a real way, like he is the quintessential avatar for a baby boomer, like very stuck in his ways. And like, I've always done it this way. And what you should just get up and work, kind of thing. And, there's some merit to that, but there's also, like, I think the Gen Xers after them, the business owners, which is like between them and the baby boomers, like we get a lot of contrast with the businesses we work with. And the best ones that are in that chasm, they're accepting the difference of the generation, and they are, I think, leaning into the good aspects of it, where millennials and the generations that are a little younger, they, if wrangled correctly, they just want to be a part of something bigger. And so equity can be a tool in elevating that. And so, to answer your question, like, what do we do about that? How do we answer that? I think equity is not a silver bullet. These types of structures are not a silver bullet. They aren't meant for everyone, in my opinion, which is the downside of something like an ESOP, for example. An ESOP
Yeah.
is a qualified retirement plan, no different than a 401k, in the sense that it becomes an entitlement. You
Yes.
actually don't have to do anything for it, and
Yes.
that is actually not, like, a lot of people get it wrong. They're like, "Oh, employee ownership reigns, like it must be this like socialistic machine." Is like, no, actually, I'm like a diehard meritocracy guy, and a lot of our customers are those who want to give it to everyone can, and those who want to cherry pick the top performers can as well. That's one of the benefits of alternative equity. And so I think, used correctly, these things are tools, almost as like a litmus test to say, well, if you rise to the occasion, equity is one of the best tools for creating wealth generation that we've ever seen. And so, to give someone something like you mentioned that aligns them ultimately with the goals of the business, it says to them, if you show up and we win, then you also win. It answers the question, what's in it for me?
Yeah. Yeah. You made a lot of good points there. And I want to bring us back because, yeah, there are different generations and different aspirations and visions and what have you. But, one of the value drivers in my book is, all themed around transferability, is succession. And whether someone plans to sell their company to private equity or transition it to family, or simply, build a legacy, a business that is never sold, right? Why do you think, why should succession planning begin years before they actually need it? What's your thoughts
Yeah.
around
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding. Like, I think you're right. In my experience, we probably have similar businesses we work with where they come to us, 3 to 5 years before an exit. A lot of our customers, they don't know if they want to they don't want to know if they want to exit, or they don't know if they want to sell. But the best ones, they want to be sellable. They want
Yes.
to build big or better or durable businesses that have options. And that's what I get excited about. And so I think the proof is in the pudding, in the sense that the best operators are the ones that are being proactive about these things. And it's not like, I think succession planning is almost a dirty word. It's like you have to trick them into eating their vegetables. It's like, no, how about we focus on growth? What if we aligned your best people with the business goals that allows you to hit your budgets, become more profitable, and then at the end of the day gives you more optionality if you do want to pass the reins of the business.
Yeah. And honestly, that word stuck out the most, optionality, because we really like that framing, because options, we don't know what's going to happen, right? I could give you some of the best case studies of, transactions where we were celebrating and excited and cheering and high-fiving, and but there's been those case studies where health was an issue, someone had passed away, someone was forever disabled. We and they just didn't have options. And so optionality has become one of this big drivers, even my own personal life and business is I want options.
Yeah.
I don't have to exercise them.
Yep.
But if I don't have those options, then I'm going to be limited in what I can do in whatever situation comes across. And so that really resonates with me, because I speak a lot about optionality, and this is something that I think I certainly encourage everyone tuned in and listening to us to consider, because one of the biggest themes in my book, The Inevitable Exit, is that the exit, it isn't just one singular event, right? It's the outcome of years of intentional preparation and planning. And when you think about that, just like, we're accustomed and we're conditioned to, if we have a key person in a business, banks included, will put a key person life insurance policy on that key individual. And so, but that's something we have opened up to over the last, 10 to 15 years, I'll call it. Before then, key life man insurance was reserved for very select few. But there again, what I'm speaking to is that the optionality of that. And that's, I'm telling you, and everyone listening, that's what you want to focus in, is those
And that's freedom.
freedom. That's a great way to describe it. In succession planning, I like how you say, we don't have to trick them into eating their vegetables, because succession planning is commonly confused with retirement, right? But from our perspective in the work that we do in M&A and investment banking, it's really about enterprise value. And regardless if you transact that enterprise value or not, you still are accountable as an owner to the enterprise value of the company. So that's your accountability mechanism. So I have a closing question for you though, Chris. You ready? So if every founder listening today wanted to dramatically increase the long-term value, the enterprise value of their business, what's the very first conversation they should have with themselves about their leadership team?
I hope this doesn't feel like a cop-out, but in my experience, both as a leader and observing leaders, is have a conversation with yourself about how transparent you are with that leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
Are they in the fold?
Yeah.
How well do you communicate together as a team? How well do they understand the goals of the business? How well do they understand the financial state of the business? Do they understand how profit works in their organization? To me, that comes before anything else. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. One of the common themes of successful entrepreneurs in our network and our clients is transparency and authenticity wins every single time. Every single time. So I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I don't think it's a cop out at all. I think it's very wise, and it comes from a place where you have been through these private capital events, and you're mindful of it. So that's really good. Thank you for that, Chris. And thanks for being on with us. This has been a powerful podcast, in my opinion. And, Reins and everything that you're doing, I wish you much success. We'll have some show notes for folks to be able to reach out to you and learn more about the offerings and how they could get involved with you guys.
Yeah, no, sounds good, Brian. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And if you're a founder listening to today and you want to dramatically increase the long-term value of your business, the very first conversation they should have is with themselves and their leadership team, just as Chris and I were talking about. And I'd encourage you to continue this journey. We provoke thought. Hopefully we have educated you guys and provide you some actionable advice. But I'm going to give you a couple call to actions here. Pick up my book, The Inevitable Exit, at inevitableexit.com, where I share the framework that we've talked about. And we used to help other founders build transferable businesses that have the options that we've been talking about. And not only the options, but have and command the premium valuations in the marketplace should you pursue that option. And if you're already surrounding yourself with entrepreneurs that are like-minded, or if you want to surround yourself with more entrepreneurs that are like-minded and going through the same journey with you, I invite you to join us at the Empire Builder community. You could sign up at empire-builder.com, and we will teach you and show you and give you a roadmap and playbook on how to build valuable company. So you have those options we've been talking about. I'm your host, Brian Franco. This has been another episode of the M&A Guy Podcast. We'll see you all next week.